So this season is about to end, and you know what that means? I am reviewing the very next season, which is a Daredevil season. I'm super excited for that. It's one of my favorite characters in Marvel by far. And this is a really interesting one. I feel like some of these cards are quite strong, and some of them feel kind of weak and a little bit baffling, but they're quite complicated. So I'm going to try and go through them one by one and break down how I feel, and maybe some sticking points to where we're unsure necessarily how the card will function. In this video, I'm going to change my rating style to be less like the IMDb style rating style, where 7 was like mid, to actually make sure that 2.5 I feel is mid, and if I go with that from this video onwards, we'll have a consistent rating. So first up we have Shadowlands Daredevil, which is a 2/2. On reveal, shuffle 3 demons. When you draw a card with 6 or more power, +2 power. So basically, this card will then shuffle 3 demons into your deck. And presumably when you draw one of those, it will give Shadowlands Daredevil 2 power, along with any other card in your deck that is 6 power or higher will also give Daredevil +2 power. So this fits in with the sort of Moondragon Chamber style of card, the 2-drop that can get a whole bunch of buffs, really. I don't think as good as those, however, because the way we look at it is, yes, it's giving you 3 demons, but they're going into your deck, they're not going into your hand. And in Marvel Snap, you kind of win more often than not when you're playing cards you've intended to put into your deck. Something like Thanos, for example, shuffles 6 stones into your deck, yes, but most of those draw, so you play them and it would cycle through your deck. This, instead of drawing, would give you 2 power to Daredevil and they're slightly higher stated, right? I don't think that's worth it. Even if you play this on turn 2, and who knows, you might not necessarily draw something 6 or more power every single turn after that. That's 4 turns and it could be a 2/10 max stated. Yeah, and you have some 1/6s to put down. In that scenario, yes, it's very good. However, there have been situations with Moondragon, for example, you don't necessarily play her on turn 2. She's still functional, but I think Shadowlands Daredevil will be probably about the same level of functional. It's a weird one. I want to like the card, I do. It's not going to work with Victoria Hand because the cards aren't created in hand, and it could work with something like Gambit, but to give you 1 extra power doesn't seem super useful. But any instance of flooding your deck with extra cards, think something like Shang-Chi, for example, the Master of the Rings version. That just adds 1 extra card to your deck, and by default that already made it so much more difficult to play. And it's where it contradicts itself slightly, because the earlier you play Daredevil, the better it is for Daredevil stats. But the earlier you play Daredevil, the less likely you are to draw the other cards that make whatever deck you're building function. And I think for that reason, I kind of have to give the card a 2.5. I'm going to go middle of the road. I do think there could be decks where people play this and maybe they've got some good cards in hand and then they're drawing some demons and they don't mind too much. Some people have mentioned Surta, but I don't even know if Surta feels that great with this, because you play Shadowlands Daredevil, you play Surta. Maybe you get a couple of cards you're drawing that you can play, but then you're drawing some demons. I think that is possibly the most likely home for this. And that's why I'm not going any lower than 2.5, and 2.5 being the mid-range thing. And I'm more than happy with that. So next up here we have Wilson Fisk, which is a 5/9, costs 3 if you have the highest power among cards in play. So I can for sure already place one place that this card's going to work great in, and it is the deck that I played recently, the one with Viv Vision and Supergiant and Ozymandias and all of that. It takes the entire power of cards in play, which I have only just understood by reading this, I won't lie. But if you're playing a Nightcrawler and then I Am Patriot, getting a 3/9 to play on top of that, I don't think there's anything beating a 3/9 on turn 3, really. Even the buffed Debris recently has got to 3/8, that's still not going to beat this. 3/9 is the highest statted 3-drop we have seen. But it's a 5/9 otherwise, which isn't great, really. And I like the idea that they've gone for costs 3 instead of costs 2 less or something, because I think they fear cards like this having their abilities procced multiple times through whatever means. But a 3/9 is just decent. It's just a decent body, really. It's similar vibes to when Full Obsidian came out and 4/10 that you could only play on a 1-drop. It's funny that I mentioned that because the card very similar coming up. But a 3/9 that you can only play if you have the highest power among cards in play, I think if you build your deck around it, can very easily happen. And with a deck like the one I just mentioned, can actually very easily happen. I don't think it's a super interesting card by any means. I think it's going to make that deck better, and if people dislike that deck, people are going to get more annoyed at it, which again is a hint at some cards we have coming up that are going to fit specifically into decks that people are already annoyed at. But I think I'm going to give it 4 stars. I can see this card doing pretty well. It's not anywhere near 5-star territory. I see some drawbacks, obviously. But I'm comfortable giving it 4 stars. So next up on the week of release, we've got the weekly card drop, which is Karen Page, a 4/5 with On Reveal. Give one of your 1, 2, and 3 cost characters plus 2 power each. This is a very awkward card, I think. On turn 4, you're giving these buffs out. Yeah, it's not 100% guaranteed that you filled your curve out with a 1, 2, and 3 drop card. It almost feels like it plays like Wiccan for that reason. To get the most of her benefit, you need to really have a 1, 2, and 3 drop on board. And because Wiccan is just better, I think plus 2 energy is better than plus 6 power most of the time. I don't really see this card fitting in too well. I mean, like, yes, there's the kind of like Maverick decks or things with like Clear or whatever, but again, there's a consistency issue similar to what Daredevil has, that it makes it hard for me to see where this card's going to fit. You can proc it like a multiple times, but only to the same extent that you really can Wiccan, which I don't see happen very often. I wanted to like this card, but I think I'm going to have to give it a 2-star. I really don't see many areas it fits into. Like, I'm trying to think, with the Wilson Fisk deck, like if you had a Nightcrawler, a Scarny Sun, Debris, and then you played Karen Page to buff the location to keep the Scarny Sun going. For that reason, maybe. Maybe there's a couple of areas it could go into. It might surprise people. It might be one of those things where you just play this on turn 6 and just dish out a bunch of power all over the place that nobody expected. For that reason, I'm going to keep it in a similar vein to Shadowlands Daredevil and give it a 2.5. Okay, next up we have Punisher War Machine, which is a 2/2. Slightly interesting description. When drawn, mark one of your empty locations. Then it has an objective on top of that. Win that location, and then once you have done that, you get +1 max energy. So before I go into my review of this character, there's 2 questions I have, because I don't think objective cards can complete their objective while they're in your hand, right? So this card has to be on the board for its objective to go off. And you draw this and it marks empty location. Okay. So that was technically my first question, but I think I answered it. So my only question remaining is, does the opponent see this location as well? Because if the opponent sees this location, this card is not that great. But I also feel like the opponent has to see the location to know what's going on. It's a tricky one. If the opponent sees the location, say turn 1 or something, and again, this would fit into a Wilson Fisk style deck, then they're going to really try and force win that location as well. But the other concern I have with this card is you probably don't want to play it turn 2, because putting 2 power into a location isn't going to help you win it. But then you assume have to be winning that location when the card is on the board. That was my second question. I suppose I'll rephrase it this time. You can win the location and its objective will complete, but if the location is not currently won by the time you play the card, I assume you don't get the energy. It seems like a lot of setup. And for +1 energy, do you really want to do that much? You know, you're fighting the opponent for a location, you're building your deck around it possibly, you're then having to make sure you play Punisher. Probably turn 4 most of the time, honestly. Which then only means turn 5 and 6 you have +1 energy. Yeah, it's difficult. I suppose the alternate is if you had Nightcrawler and you played Nightcrawler on that location, then you played Punisher on top of the Nightcrawler, and then at that point, more than likely you'd probably be winning the location. Then you get +1 max energy for turn 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's pretty good. Like I won't turn that down in any sense. That is pretty good. Comparatively to Wiccan again, if you play Wiccan and get +2 energy on turns 5 and 6. I don't know. I think there's a lot of setup for this card. And for that reason, I'm going to give it a 2. Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with a 2. There's not many reasons to want to play this over just playing like Lunar Snow, and then your opponent's not going to make the most of their energy as much as you are. Although I suppose it's put in here comparatively to something like Jennifer Kale. Although its objective will continue throughout the entire game, so it is something your opponent's going to have to keep an eye on. But 2, I think I'm happy with that. Then next up in the same week, we have a series 4 card dropping, which is Ikari, a 4/12, with the text, "You can only play this where an enemy is afflicted with negative power." Now, I don't think 4/12 is a card you're going to want to play in an Afflict deck. And even if you do, most Afflict decks play their Afflicting cards on the last turn. I do, however, see this in other places. So, recently with Polaris, people were pushing the Afflict style decks and trying to see if they could fit her into those decks. Whereas I went for a bit more of a Phantom X style approach. And the deck actually did pretty well, I won't lie. It's slightly gimmicky here and there, but it actually performed quite well. I don't know if it could fit into a deck like that, per se. But because I was running Airwalker, it could just pull a 4/12 out of your deck, and you're not going to be upset about that. But then you also have things like Dormammu, which, I don't know, you could pull an Ikari out. Well, when there's a location that you've afflicted with negative power, that is. Maybe I'm coping, not too sure. But I feel like there are some places where this card is going to see play, and seeing as it has a similar effect to Cull Obsidian, which is what I was saying earlier, I think this card is actually really good. It's a 4/12, really. As long as you find the right deck for it. I don't know if it fits into the meta currently, where you're kind of stacking the benefits you're getting from something. Like you're giving Maverick energy so that Maverick can give something else energy. Power, that is. Or Star-Lord is boosting energy and then you're grabbing it again and it's boosting energy. Or Supergiant is in there purely to keep the momentum of you winning the locations to give you priority. I think a card like this is just going to be in a big stats deck, and I don't really know. When it comes back round to the Certa decks again, this doesn't necessarily fit in those kind of decks. To actually afflict an opponent's card with negative power, you need something like a Hazmat, or you need something like a Lasher. I don't know why Lasher comes to mind. Marrow is the main one that I was thinking of. I think it could fit into the Phantom X deck that I made recently. I would happily try it there. It's tight for spaces, I won't lie. But I would gladly give it an attempt. Other than that, I think it's just got a few narrow homes in decks that aren't popular, which is why people might overlook this card, but I'm going to give it a 3.5. Now here is the card everyone is excited for, I think. It's coming out the week after, and it is Muse, a 3/3 with the ongoing +3 power for each location where one of your cards has been destroyed. Which is very cool. After having seen the Daredevil show, you probably know who this guy is, and the concept of him being buffed for each location having something killed in is quite a cool idea. I don't know if I see this card being in base Destroy decks. Destroy decks aren't necessarily what they used to be anymore. It's not always the Deadpool, Destroy Deadpool over and over again, play Null and Deadpool on the last turn. I see Shulao packages amongst a bunch of other stuff, and I think I see this going in more of a deck that, I don't know, say like a Thanos deck where you play a bunch of stones and then Killmonger on the last turn and Muse just goes to a 3/12. I think a Thanos deck would gladly have a card like this, and they used to run Killmonger to free up location spaces. Haven't necessarily seen it as much anymore unless you're running Firehair. Could be a cool location for it, probably the one that I'm going to try it when it releases. But in terms of a regular Destroy deck, it's possible, but Destroy tends to benefit off of having those exponential growths where Deadpool is getting bigger and bigger, and then Venom eats the Deadpool, and you've got like a massive 3-drop. Probably bigger than a 3/12. Also, you have to realize this card might be slightly awkward to play in a deck like that because you're wanting to play it on a location where something has already been destroyed. Unless you're playing a Killmonger or something, because you don't want that card itself to be destroyed. Or you're playing it at the end of the game. Still possible to have it in those situations. It's a 3/12 with a slightly tricky ask, but I think it's easier than Ikari, for example, and it fits into much more decks. People are very excited for it. I tend to give a card 5 stars every season. I don't think anything is jumping out at me in this season to give 5 stars to, and just out of tradition and the fact that I'm going to give 5 stars to something, I'm going to give it to Muse. So the week after, the last week of May, we have Lady Bullseye, which is a 2/2. On reveal, afflict an enemy card with -2 power. Repeat on a different enemy for each of your unspent energy. So this was another card I had one question about. I think the answer might be relatively simple, because otherwise it could be quite OP. But my question is, does that mean unspent energy for the entire game? Or does it mean unspent energy for this turn? Because that is the thing. It could also work where if you play it and you have 1 unspent energy on turn 3, it afflicts, and then, I don't know, turn 4 you skip all the energy, it could afflict 4 more times. If that's the case, this card is very, very good. I might have to give it the 5-star, but because we're sitting under assumption right now that it only afflicts on its own turn, I will have to reduce it quite a bit. It's still going to fit into a similar kind of deck where you're getting extra energy or you're passing energy, basically the high evo style decks where people expect Star-Lord to go initially. But this is a card that supports a card like Star-Lord for sure. I do think it doesn't support it in the way that's going to help the decks that currently make that card annoying, though, I don't think. I actually kind of want this card to be one of those where, say you skip turn 4, it then afflicts -8 energy onto the opponent's side. I keep saying energy. I keep swapping energy and power. It afflicts -8 power to the opponent's side. Because, I don't know, maybe that's too OP. I liked the concept, and I like the idea of these style of cards. Kind of like Sunspot, where if you keep passing energy each turn, it's getting bigger and bigger. This is a 2-drop, which is 2/4 stats, kind of. So maybe that is too strong. I really hope it's the secondary one, but if it was, it would probably have to be a 2/0 or something like that. So it's probably the primary one. In which case, I'm going to give it 4 stars. I'll give it 4 stars. It's the kind of card that helps Ikari. It also amplifies a lot of these negative archetypes that aren't necessarily afflict, because I think the negative power things are seeping in all over the place now. You've got Selene, Horseman of Death, and Caliban, Horseman of Pestilence, and those don't necessarily fit into the same archetype, but now you have trigger things that aren't just Ajax or Diamondback with Polaris, Horseman of Death. And I think cards like Lady Bullseye are going to help that a lot, actually. Because this is a deck that you're wanting to skip energy. Maybe it's like the Hulk deck, you're skipping energy. I think Polaris was trialed in the High Evo Hawk deck, but didn't do too great, which is unfortunate. But I think there's a cook that could be worked out with Lady Bullseye. I'm rambling a lot, aren't I? Yeah. 4 stars. If I have said 4 stars already, then whatever my tracker has been recording, but I'm going to go with 4 stars. And then lastly, on the same week, we have Stick, which is a Series 4 card, a 4/3 with on reveal, give the next card you play power equal to this card's power. Oh, why did they have to do this to Stick? They have made him into a Shulao card, and it is hurting me. There is one question. Again, I don't know. I seem to have a lot of questions with these cards. How does the interaction between Shulao and Forge work, for example? If you play Forge and then go to play Shulao after Forge, does Shulao buff Forge and then Forge triggers on Shulao? Or is it the other way around? Like, if you play Shulao, does Forge give the power and then the on reveal go off? Because I think it does. It actually does. I'm thinking like Silver Surfer style things, like Forge gives the buff to Brood, and then Brood's on reveal goes off and it pops the 2 locations. So that would then mean that Stick would give the 3 power to Shulao, and then Shulao will buff it, right? Because Stick has to be on the board to get buffed by Shulao. Huh. So I'm actually not as annoyed by that anymore. That's interesting. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but that should be the way it works, right? You play Forge, you play Brood, Forge hits Brood with the extra power, Brood's on reveal then goes off, summoning the 3/4s. So these 2 cards are both on reveals with similar effects. Stick goes down first, then Shulao. Stick gives 3 power to Shulao. Shulao then buffs Stick, making that interaction pointless. Huh. Yeah, and I think that's why it's a Series 4 card. I don't think I've seen anybody talk about that interaction yet, which is interesting. Before I start rambling again though, that makes this card substantially weaker because it's not going to be a meta contender for that reason. I therefore see it as a weaker version of Wolverine Horseman of War, because it's a 4/3, right? That when it gets 2 power, it gives 4 power out to different things. It could be used in a different area, per se. You could play Stick and then play Maverick, and then Maverick gets 3 power from Stick. Or Stick gets buffed by some things, maybe gets hit by Gwenpool a bunch of times. It's going to be in those style of decks. It's probably going to be in Zombie Galacti, actually. Thinking about it, that's where I could see this card. Say Gwenpool buffs like your Stick accidentally or whatever. The turn before you play Zombie Galacti, you can play Stick. But in that case, wouldn't Shuri always be better? Because Stick can be a backup Shuri. Maybe Stick could buff your Maverick instead, so that the power still sits there to give to Zombie Galacti. I think that's where I see this card. Again, I have rambled a lot this video. If you're still here, I am so thankful to you. You are a real one. For sure, put the eye emojis in the end of the comments, because I think it's a trend when I make these videos. I always seem to just ramble. We're on 26 minutes. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Stick, 3.5. He's a fun card, has some aspects of that he could be used in. Worse than Maverick. Yeah, I think he sits there. Can't be used in Shulao if my hypothesis is correct. But yeah, that wraps it all up for the May cards. Nothing's really seeming too great here. Maybe we're overlooking a few things here and there. I could see Ikari pulling something out of the hat. Wilson Fisk, I do think, will be the best card up until Muse releases. Because a 3/9 is nothing to kind of scoff at, really. But yeah, in that case, thank you for watching. If you did enjoy the video, please don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. It helps a ton. And if you're here at this point, it would mean the world to me. And yeah, thanks in advance, and I'll speak to you all next time.